Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to CCLP's first policy forum on the future of affordable housing. This is the first in a series of events that CCLP will be hosting in the forum format, which is a new format for us. It's going to consist of two main components. First, we're going to start out with a panel discussion with several CCLP staff members who have been deeply involved in affordable housing work, some of them for many years, some of them more recently. And we're going to go through a series of panel questions and take a deep dive into the policy work that's been happening to give us all a good grounding and understanding of what's out there and the issues and challenges that we face with affordable housing in Colorado. The second half of our event, we're going to have an open forum where we invite your participation. So we'll have plenty of time, not just for questions and answers, but for folks to weigh in with their stories, their comments, their concerns, their experiences that have happened in their communities and in their lives. So we're really looking forward to that. We're looking forward to hearing from all of you in the second half. You'll be able to do that by indicating that you want to come on screen or come on audio. Either one is just fine. In the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So if you see that one in between polls and chat at the bottom Q&A, use that one to go ahead and indicate in that second half that you want to come on screen or on audio and speak. We also have a chat function. That's a separate function, but please make use of that if you want to just weigh in with a small comment or something like that. But please use that Q&A function to indicate that you want to speak. Also, if you don't want to come on audio or you don't want to come on screen, but you still want to ask a question or make a comment, that's just fine. Go ahead and do that in the Q&A section, and we will take those written questions as well. Okay, so we will remind you of that in the chat as we go forward, the logistics of how to weigh in and participate in the second half. But we're looking forward to our panel discussion. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our Executive Director at CCLP, Tiffany Lennon, to talk a little bit more about the panel, introduce the panel members, and moderate that discussion. Tiffany, take it away.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Tony, would you mind allowing me to start my video? Thank you. So welcome. We've had a tremendous turnout for this event. So hopefully we can continue to build momentum moving forward. As Bruce mentioned, my name is Tiffany Lennon. I have the privilege of serving as Executive Director of the Colorado Center on Law and Policy. As Bruce mentioned, this is the first of a series where we will discuss pertinent topics affecting Coloradans experiencing poverty. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Colorado Center on Law and Policy, or as we are fondly called, CCLP, we have an exceptional staff. Our staff are comprised of legal and legislative advocates and researchers. We know how to get bills passed. Many of you know how to get bills passed or defeated, as the case may be. But we also know how to successfully implement new laws and ensure ongoing enforcement. Perhaps most importantly, we do not do this work alone. Many of you are key partners, and we are not only grateful for your partnership, we recognize that we truly cannot and would not do this work without you. The spirit of partnership and collaboration has given rise to this new Policy Forum series hosted by CCLP. In this forum and future forums, we will seek to identify and strategize on how to create systemic change in the areas of food, housing, health, and income. This forum will be focused on affordable housing. As you know, housing has garnered much attention over the last decade, not only in Colorado, but across the country. The crisis of affordable housing is not going away anytime soon. So let's fix this together. To this end, we have lots of content and information to cover in a very short period of time, and we want to ensure that we hear from you. So let's get started. I will ask the panelists, who I will introduce to you in a moment, a series of questions. I encourage you to take notes if you wish, and or just make a note of your own comments that you wish to address and or issues that you wish to bring up, because we truly want to hear from you. So the CCLP panelists, I will begin with Ellen Giratana. Ellen's our managing attorney. Shar Robert, many of you know, is our legislative director. Morgan Turner, who's new to CCLP but not new to the housing advocacy, she's our policy advocate. Dea Zavalia is our director of strategic priorities and certainly has been at the forefront of solving the housing crisis in Colorado. Charlie Brennan is our deputy director of strategic priorities. I'm sorry, Charlie Brennan is our deputy director of research. Much of the research that is generated from CCLP, Charlie has tremendous vision, and his touch is all over that research to ensure that we are relying upon evidence-based solutions. So with that, I will move forward and start asking questions of the panelists. So this is going to be a bit more informal, an opportunity to truly have a conversation. So let me kick us off and ask the panel, why is housing so unaffordable in Colorado? What has created this crisis? Feel free to jump in.
I can jump in and take the first question here for everyone. Feel free, folks, to jump in too. I'll try to keep this brief because it is sort of there's a lot of answers to that question, I think, and so there's definitely things that are within our control, and a lot of things that are outside of our control, particularly here as a sort of a state group or a state. We sort of things like interest rates, economic conditions, those sorts. The cost of materials, cost of labor. Those are sort of all things that are out of our control, but do contribute to the high cost of housing and have, contributed to sort of the affordability crisis that we find ourselves in today. That said, I think there's a lot of things that we do have control over. Particularly, I think the local zoning and land use regulations really, over the past couple of decades, and this isn't necessarily the case only in Colorado. Certainly, we've seen this across the country, have resulted in sort of a mismatch between our supply of housing and the demand for housing, both from new households that are created within Colorado as our kids grow up and start to form their own household, or from folks that move in to our state from other states and other parts of the world. And so really, I think part of the challenge that we have is to understand how we can amend and how can we encourage communities to really change our local land use regulations to allow for a greater variety of housing, to allow for greater densities of housing, and allow for specifically those housing types that tend to be most conducive to affordability. So one of the areas that we've focused on as an organization in recent years has been in mobile homes. That's a tremendous source of naturally occurring affordable housing in our state, and certainly I think will play a large role moving forward in terms of, or should play a large role in terms of our different communities, particularly rural communities, affordable housing strategies moving forward. In addition, there's a lot of research out there that indicates that not even necessarily the big apartment buildings that we see going up in Denver, but those sort of mid-range duplex, triplex, quadplex buildings, those tend to be the most affordable and actually tend to have rents that are below market rate. One of the reasons for that is because as a smaller landlord, having one of 4 units vacant for a long time is not good for your bottom line, and so you want to fill that as quickly as possible, which often tends to lead to lower rental rates for those folks who live in those housing. And there's plenty of other ones, but I think those are the some big ones, and I'll pass it off to the rest of the panel to see what other folks have to say.
Yeah, if I could just jump in really quick, Charlie, I think you lifted up a couple of things that really speak to the work that I bring to CCLP and the history that I bring to CCLP around the intersectionality of housing and other issues, specifically around income and workforce and just that intersection. But one thing that you hit on that really speaks to the legacy, I think, of Mile High Connects and what we're bringing forward within CCLP is around land use and really looking at more of that community ownership and community stewardship of land. And really, how do we transition wealth to more of a community wealth building kind of lens to really address why housing has been so unaffordable and unattainable for so many folks over the last many years, even in our recent history. And we can point to, milestones along the way of when rents increased 5%, 10%, 20%, and you kind of see this just trajectory moving forward. So we'll get into it a little bit later on as we look to the future state, but I just wanted to bring that in and acknowledge the history of affordable housing really being as kind of an acknowledgement that we haven't been as intersectional in addressing some of these issues as maybe we could have been.
And Shar, I'm curious what you think. You have a tremendous legacy in the Denver community. As I mentioned, many people that have registered for this event you've worked with, you've known. And so what have you seen in our most recent, say within 5 years or so, what have you seen to be sort of the game changers, if you will, of bills that have been passed that really have helped to move the needle in ensuring and generating more affordable housing?
So looking at the issue of affordable housing, I would say over the last 5 years, what we've seen is as the problem has increased and broadened and deepened, the concern about the affordability of housing has become more widespread, both among the general public as well as with legislators. For decades, Colorado, people introduced tenants' rights laws, but they all were killed for decades. And only within the last 5 years has there been a real success in passing legislation that protects tenants. There actually are too many to list off in a short period of time. Another big difference is in terms of just, is government investing in affordable housing? Before I started I started at CCLP in 2013. And at that time, the entire budget for for the Division of Housing it grew from like $2 million a year for the entire state to $10 million a year for the entire state. So it's no wonder we lost ground, because the private sector, it's hard for them to build housing given the cost that really serves the needs of people who have low income. And let's see, I would say the big change, obviously, this past year has been the massive, massive infusion. This is just astounding amount of money. And it's a one-time only opportunity to really get some things in place.
That makes a lot of sense. So let me pitch the following question to the entire panel. What is preventing us from making greater headwinds? What are we currently facing in Colorado that's creating a challenge to creating more affordable housing?
I'm a woman of few words, so I'm just going to say one thing, which is business interests. I mean, I think it's not seen as these are human beings that need a safe and affordable housing, not just affordable housing, but safe and affordable housing. This is a business opportunity, which, I mean, I don't necessarily think that's a new thing, but it's certainly expanding. So I think business interests is a huge issue, definitely, certainly at the Capitol and in the executive branch as well.
And that investor interest is particularly focused on low-income housing and mobile home parks for business reasons, i.e. to extract the most, profits out of the investment.
Yeah, Shar, I think that's an important point. And I don't know I can't off the top of my head say the exact numbers, but I know that, something I saw recently was saying how, mobile home parks are actually one of the most valuable or sort of most profitable investments that real estate investment trusts or REITs can make in terms of the different housing products that are out there. And so, definitely, I think, sort of the profit aspect of housing sort of is an important factor that I don't think that we talk about enough, particularly too when we're talking about what costs are driving the cost of housing in our state. We often talk about land, labor, supplies, regulations, but developer profits aren't necessarily part of that conversation. And not to say that developers shouldn't make money. I think that that we're in a free market system. That's the reality of the society we live in. But I think questioning whether or not the rates of return and sort of the profit margins that are earned, and sort of if those are realistic moving forward, considering how much of a housing need that we have in our state and across the country, I think should be on the table as part of the discussion.
One of the notes in chat refers to the population growth in Colorado, not all entirely attributable to the legalization of pot, though. But that yes, more people have been moving in than have been moving out, although we may have reached that balance point where people need to move out to afford housing.
And certainly the supply, I'm sorry, Dea, please go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, just like a quick thread, that part of it is also, I think both Shar and Charlie, and I saw some of this reflected in the chat, which is really exciting to see coming in, but the financing mechanisms that we have are also not necessarily designed in such a way that community organizations that have more of the community-minded development in mind are able to rapidly move capital into community projects. So we're really up against really well-intentioned community-led organizations attempting to beat the market at a clip that just cannot meet the reality. So we're facing, I think I heard Charlie, Shar, and even Ellen mention, it's almost like we have these compounding factors within the affordable housing world that are all kind of creating these headwinds or these potential barriers. But there's also solutions for us to consider as we think about what lies ahead and the future opportunities for us to shift.
Was someone else going to jump in? I was going to offer a pedestrian comment around the supply of housing, right? We haven't increased our supply of housing to the numbers that are sustainable for many of our communities. So let me ask you this. Dea started to talk about solutions. What do you see as some ways in which we can really move the needle on this? And this is, part of the conversation we're hoping to have with the larger group here. But, what do you see on the horizon that can counteract these headwinds, the resistance? What do you think we can do in the short term to really make a big difference?
Well, I'll offer 3 points. One is we have this tremendous opportunity with the federal money, the American Rescue Plan money, with a few $100 million. And I think there's an opportunity for all of us to be watching where that money goes, working with our local governments to make sure it is going into places of need and not just to whoever has the best connections. There also is a challenge with how do you fund any of this after the federal money runs out? There is a ballot proposal that is in the pipeline right now as a possible source of funding for that. Second, I think we're not done with the discussion about stabilizing rents. Even though it has not progressed very far. I was actually shocked when the Health Foundation did their pulse poll and found out that 74% of Coloradans favor limiting the landlord's ability to make large rent increases to current tenants. And that included Democrats, independents, and Republicans. So I think we're not done with the conversation of rent stabilization. And lastly, I think often ignored in the discussion is looking at it from a tax policy point of view, because we as government subsidize housing, but primarily we subsidize it for those at the upper end. So we subsidize home mortgage interest, we subsidize homeowners who are seniors. And I think there's a discussion starting like through House Bill 1205, which is a credit for renters who are over 65. Kind of posing the question, why is government only subsidizing homeowners? What about renters? Representative Wu did a bill that got killed that just flat out said, hey, let's subsidize renters. He did limit it to kind of the middle income renter because it was a non-refundable tax credit. But there's a lot of discussion about affordable housing and tax policy, like property taxes as well. And so I think that's also part of that constellation. Those are my initial thoughts.
I can listen to you talk about the subsidization of the wealthier Coloradans all day, Shar, because it's so interesting and it's myth shattering, right? It's like it debunks so many of our myths around the fact that the wealthy do receive financial subsidies to offset some of their overall housing costs. We don't typically think about it in that way or talk about it in that way, but it's actually really true. So we only have about 2 minutes before we turn it over to the larger group. So I would like to know, and this is shifting gears a little bit, but I'd like to know from you, what do you think about in terms of any new developments that perhaps, I mean, we've talked about zoning, we've talked about supply, we touched upon a lot of different aspects that are really key and that we know are key. What are new developments that we might not have, that might not be part of our regular conversations?
Well, I think something that's coming from me, if I can just jump in really quickly, and Ellen, you kind of alluded to this earlier, but really thinking about housing in kind of broader strokes. So not, and kind of de-siloing it a little bit. It's not enough for housing to just be affordable, we know that, but it also needs to be safe. It needs to be environmentally sustainable, accessible. And then I think another thing, that's on the horizon and definitely gaining traction on on a national level is really starting to think of alternative options or stepping away from traditional housing options. So increased funding and individual and collective ownership or shared equity models. Something that also was coming up for me is, zoning policies as it relates to accessory dwelling units. Of that being, another way for folks to acquire and generate wealth within families. I know a lot of community organizations, one being West Denver Renaissance Collaborative and Montbello Organizing Committee, are doing a ton of work in their communities in the Denver area, really trying to push for shared equity, community ownership, and really starting with community prior to developing.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Morgan. Thank you for sharing that. So we are at time, and now I'm going to turn it over to Dea, who will facilitate the second part of this. So Dea, it's all you.
Thank you, Tiffany. And thank you, everyone. We've seen your questions come in through the Q&A, some comments coming in through the chat. And as Bruce and Tiffany both shared at the beginning of this session, this is really a new way for CCLP to be in conversation with you all as we start to look to the future and start to look at our priorities when it comes to the affordable housing space. So now we really want to hear from you about what's on your radar when it comes to affordable housing. As Bruce shared at the very beginning, we invite you to offer what you are doing and how others may be a part of this conversation. So we really want to start by asking you all a quick prompt of maybe what are one or two opportunities that you see in the affordable housing space. What do you see as having the most potential impact on affordable housing? You've heard members of our team mention accessory dwelling units, zoning, financing, tax policy, but what do you think is an opportunity? So I want to invite you all, if you're interested in coming on camera and sharing your thoughts verbally with us, to please indicate that you would be interested. And I will turn to my CCLP team to help bring folks into this conversation with me and Shar.
So I am looking at the chat, and or excuse me, I'm looking at the Q&A. Okay, so we have a.
I see Alfonso Shar is actually
Thank
wanting
you.
to join
Please
us.
do, because I'm.
Please jump in, Alfonso. If you need help unmuting, please let us know.
My apologies. How about that? Is that working for you? Okay.
We can hear you. Great.
Excellent, excellent. And this is one of the things that I'm learning from my community is, and I'm seeing this both in Westwood, Sloan's Lake area, and a number of other areas. Aunts, uncles, family members are trying to help other family members. But one of the issues that they're running into is financing. And one reason why I'm bringing up financing is that back in the 1970s and 80s, developers received government support for financing for many of their developments. These developments, for example, were in like Northland, Thornton, and those areas. These were covens. These were originally covens in the Denver metro area. In some cases, some of them were even restricted. But what we need is government intervention to be able to say we need to provide financial support to create an incentive for individuals to be able to help support family members. And this includes accessory dwellings, this includes development on existing properties and so on and so forth. This is probably one of the biggest pieces of legislation that I think allows communities to be entrepreneurial in terms of addressing the affordable housing market, because developers aren't developing affordable housing. It's entrepreneurs or family members, it's community that is that entrepreneurial spirit to addressing this type of a question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Alfonso. So what I heard was really thinking about a policy that makes financing available to smaller developers or family entrepreneur developers, if you will, as a potential policy opportunity. Thank you so much for offering that. I did see a member of the chat. It looked like Robert had offered to jump in too.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. So I'm Rob. I'm actually an eviction defense attorney for Colorado Legal Services. So I deal with a lot of this stuff in my day job. And CCLP does phenomenal work. And I can't thank you guys enough for what you do on the legislative side. And, you know, I also really want to thank you guys for really pushing the housing supply angle, because I think a lot of people don't really realize how much of an impediment that is to housing affordability. You know, I think it was Alfonso was talking about, you know, getting more small developers involved in, you know, creating new housing. And that's super awesome, but it's really tough when 80% of Denver is zoned for single family only. You know, if somebody wants to build a small apartment building, condo building on their single family property, that is prohibited by, you know, by local law. So the fact that you guys are out there, you know, obviously a very pro-tenant organization and fighting for more housing supply, I think is really fantastic, because there's really no way out of this crisis without building a lot more housing. You know, rent stabilization is fantastic. I used to practice in New York. It works. It's good policy when you do it right. But, you know, if we had rent stabilization now, we'd be stabilizing at an incredibly high rental rate. And we need to tame those market forces. And really the only way to do that is to create more competition that benefits tenants with a lot more housing. So thank you all for that work, and thanks for letting me have my input. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robert. I just want to share at least what I heard as a potential policy opportunity is again, looking at that zoning, exploring that zoning opportunities, what might be possible at the state level, but also what else might be possible at the local level as well. Did I hear that correctly?
Totally, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I know we have a
point
lot.
I'd like to make is ADUs are being deregulated in Denver. I know in District 1, those are being deregulated, where you have an accessory granny flat available, but it's the financing issues that people are running into.
So we had a couple postings, both from Randall Loeb and from Don Burns. I wasn't sure if they wanted to add anything verbally.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, well, that's why I asked, Randall.
You could shut me up.
Yeah.
I put in like a few different examples of what the problem is of the industry. It's not reflective of the needs of people who are indigent, who are struggling, and mostly single family women who are in charge of children, and the children going through the trauma that has been established, and environmental scans that help to develop housing that is a partnership between residents and the developers, like in Charette's, the Housing Colorado has been doing for years. We're still doing usual and customary rather than what's creative and profound. And until we stop like looking at it as a market-driven thing, as it was said, we just ain't going to go there, because a lot of people in Aloft, with the 140 of us and the 300 or 400 of us in the hotels all together, we just basically give up. And that's ridiculous. You can't do that. And it should be like they're doing in many places like Helsinki throughout your life. It shouldn't be a question of whether or not you do it like for a housing voucher. It should be just a part of our economy. But we can't do that because the materialism always jumps in front. And I've taught this a bunch, and finally Kathy Alderman and I basically came to a similar agreement that it would cost about every year about $3 billion to develop the housing necessary. So although it's a lot of money on a one-time deal, Shar, it's not significant enough to actually deal with it. And some of the major metropolitan areas are aware of that. So they commit that kind of capital to developing this, and the business interests are basically improved by it. So those would be my finer points, but there's a lot more. And Bo Simone is developing toolkits that was started in the last governor's iteration to create the housing opportunities for people who never developed housing. And you have to basically make it possible in all areas, like the thing that Hassan Latif has been developing, which is opportunities for second chance for people getting out of prison, or the 75 units for people getting out of institutions at Recuperative Care Center that'll be opened in August. We got to come up with strategies of multi-use that really are multi-use. And that's my 2 cents. So thank you for my ability to chime in.
Yeah, and I'm looking through the chat, and through the Q&A, and I'm not seeing people who are saying they would like to express their opinion verbally. What we're doing here is we're not, like, there's a question about who's the point person on housing for intellectual and developmental disabilities, or what's our philosophy of individualized versus congregate residence. Those are not questions we can answer at this moment. We're not specializing in those subject areas. But I don't know if, I think there was Jerry or Carol who both asked in particular about people with disabilities and housing, unique housing needs they might have. So at this point, we're not, we're sort of trying to hear what issues are coming up for people, but people can add. I think Jose raised his hand from CCDC. So he might want to speak to that or a different question.
Actually, we don't have a solution right now for specific housing for disabled people. But one of the things that I have seen that is very controversial to say it, of course, is that giving a blank card to corporations to continue to do what they do without any regulatory laws that forbid them from, for example, buying every land available and building their own private housing development and not respecting things like affordable housing, things like the minimum ADA requirements to have a housing that is accessible, charging whatever they want based on a market that is imaginary, that is based on the capitalist system, instead of basing their prices in the real life, in the real social reality that we are seeing not only in Colorado, but we're seeing it in states like California. I mean, you see the main streets of California filled with, for years now, filled with people who are homeless, experiencing homelessness, and who all of a sudden are experiencing homelessness. Not only people who have been homeless for different, historical reasons, but also people who are currently starting to experience homelessness because the economy is going up without control, but really going up, not really. Going down, I will say. Prices are going up. Income is not going up. And corporations are allowed to do anything they want. So one of the opportunities that I see, especially now that Colorado is in a good place, politically speaking, meaning that we have a governor that supports, poor people, that supports people with disabilities, that supports all kinds of things, it will be to introduce more regulations that control that kind of thing, that forbid corporations from, for example, charging whatever they want to just anybody.
Thank you. We do have in the queue, Carol Peoples is ready to speak.
Yeah. Hi, Shar. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Carol.
It's good to see you. I'm with Remerge, and we are interested in helping people who are coming out of incarceration. So we're always looking at that barrier of the criminal record. And so my ears perked up, and I think it was Morgan who brought up the shared equity efforts. I'd like to know more. We've been tossing that idea around of, I see that. Thank you, Dea. But trying to find those models out there that perhaps we can pass on to people who are coming out of incarceration, who then we can, if possible, connect them to financing opportunities, who then, we can do a shared living arrangement that works. This is how people are doing Oxford homes. This is how people are doing some of the sober living homes. But if we can get some ideas about models, perhaps we can help people just become homeowners themselves eventually. I also, hey, just one more thing. This isn't about affordable housing, but it is about landlord education and barriers. And I do hope that we, as a community, start working on educating landlords about their rights and responsibilities as it comes to housing as public safety, because we have too many landlords who are denying people just on the basis of a record or a poor credit review. Thank you so much.
I know that issue has come to our attention. I think Ellen has started to give some thought to that. I don't know if you wanted to say anything, Ellen.
I was just typing in the chat, actually.
Oh, sorry.
That's a really good point, Carol, about both the helping as they're coming out of incarceration and also educating landlords. I did go to there's a great Longmont Boulder landlord forum. I think that happens once a month, and I attended that and did a presentation on source of income discrimination, and most people were very engaged and wanted to know what their responsibilities were under that law, and many did not know. And so I think that that's a really, really good point, is educating folks. Some people are going to want to skirt the law regardless, but if we can educate more, I think that that's really important as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Ellen. I'll reach out to you. That's very exciting.
And Dea, we have Karen Hall.
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead and lower my hand. I live in the Littleton area, web developer. I am a member of a variety of advocacy groups and have been so for 20 years. I have 2 kids who were in the hospitality industry working in Denver, and they quit the job because the commute was so tough and they couldn't find reasonable rent in Denver so they could be closer to work. And that's not an unreasonable expectation. Then I'm the one who put the post in the chat. In 2018, Mayor Hancock had hired someone from the East Coast, started this Live Denver program that was a way to offer some subsidies to people who worked in more of the support jobs in Denver so they could have a reasonable rent and be closer to work. And I started following it. It was on the news. They built the website, and then it just disappeared. But the program had so many good concepts of, we're talking about that there's not enough workers going into the cities in different areas. His program, it had so many good ideas of, they would contribute 30, just using market rate apartments, as opposed to how long is it going to take to build affordable housing. And then also, if you're opening up market rate apartments and then offering some subsidies for them, the people to live there, you're not segregating people. And the part of it was that difference for the market rate and what the people are paying because they can't afford that much was being made up or by the city of Denver, private employers and foundations. It was seemed like such a good idea. It even had a education on financial savings and healthcare in it. I would love to see somebody contact Mayor Hancock and get this information. It was paid for. Is there something in there? Is that out of the box idea that can ramp us up and get us more affordable housing quicker? So,
yeah, I think one thing that I heard, Karen, just as a potential policy, and Shar, this is something that I think came up even in the Q&A and maybe a little bit in the chat, is this idea of a policy around public land for public good, or like institutions using their land to help develop housing or build housing a little bit faster. Like, how do we maybe look at that, taking the Denver model, what was done in 2018, that may be a little bit of a stretch, Karen, but I just wanted to point that out as something that I've heard in the chat or seen in the chat as well.
The only thing I would add to that, I'm originally from Chicago, and I was around 10, 12 years old when Cabrini Green was going. I just really am uncomfortable with segregating low-income people just because they're low income. And what I liked about the Live Denver program is you weren't being segregated. Just because you make less because you're a secretary or a janitor, you get to live in the market rate apartments. I just find that a really good approach. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think, Shar, I'm looking at the time and I'm going to transition us over to you. So now we're going to transition, and Shar is going to take it from here to learn a little bit about what you all might be doing and how can others engage. So Shar?
Yeah, and in a way, I don't know that this is terribly different than what we've just been doing, because we have had a mix of people describing. The original thought was, let's spend 15 minutes kind of hearing about the concern, and then let's spend 15 minutes talking about what are people doing, what are the different policy efforts that the people and organizations on this call are doing, where maybe they would love to see others connect and get more involved in that effort. We CCLP are not I would say we're not the first and foremost leader of the affordable housing movement. We do legislative advocacy on behalf of people living in poverty, but there is a whole lot of stuff going on. I did end up making a quick list, and we have two people who are far better than me trying to grab things out of the chat and out of the Q&A and out of the comments to capture the different things you're saying. And our hope is that at the end, because we want to keep to our time, but we want to follow up with getting kind of things in, you know, kind of a written list and kind of all the concerns identified, identify what are the different policy initiatives that people can jump into right now. But I'm sure there are people on this call who are working on, in particular, we're looking at policy initiatives, not necessarily new services. And I don't know if there's folks who would like to kick us off on that one. Okay, Jason.
Hi. And this all relates. It's a good flow of conversation. So one of the things that I'm working on, there's a new nonprofit that was just formed in May. So it's just 3 months in here, but it's called the Rural Workforce Housing Innovation Coalition. And my question that I put up in the Q&A or comment, just kind of, you know, it's not addressing maybe the greatest impact per se on probably where we have the greatest issues here in Metro Denver and a lot of the other metros, but we recognize that rural communities, particularly the economic development aspects, or, you know, the labor shortages, desire to kind of foster new enterprise and solutions in many different communities. There's more holistic strategies that could be developed and alternative living places around this beautiful state. And I know a lot of legislation just went through considering, like, you know, modular manufactured homes and things like that. But I was, you know, from a policy perspective, I'm very interested in the environmental design, like, you know, low water use, you know, the net zero developments, kind of getting out of the hecticness of the major metros, you know, working with smaller communities, maybe the design of, you know, communities, maybe there's a development in terms of thinking of it in terms of 25 units at a time in particular communities. I think that at that scale, if we look and get public-private partnerships together with philanthropy to kind of do workforce development around these new advanced innovative designs, that could really go a long way in addressing all these issues of you know, job need, economic development in a lot of these rural communities. It would take, you know, yeoman's efforts to kind of sort all of that out. I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
We do have some other folks in line, but Jason, let me just ask, have you been involved in the bill to fund the grants for different housing needs? They're having like a listening tour, including today, but they're having meetings across the state with DOLA and CHAFA, with Department of Local Affairs and the Colorado
aware. And in fact, I'm headed to La Junta tomorrow for Southeast, you know, Housing Summit.
Okay.
So yeah.
And for others on the call, there are some public hearings specifically about spending ARPA money. And also, Jason, you might look into the Prop 108 that they're collecting signatures on to add 300 million to affordable housing. And they do mention environmental sustainability as one of the criteria in the different affordable housing picture. But I know we have a lot of folks who are lined up, and I know I saw Don Burns.
I think we have Don Burns and then Alexandra with Colorado Homes for All, Shar.
Oh, good. Okay. Don, go ahead.
Thank you, Shar. Here in Denver, there is a new pilot project called the Denver Basic Income Project. And it's a pilot project to explore the implications of universal basic income. there have been a number of such projects around the country, and a very well-known project in Vancouver, Canada. And all of the evidence suggests that providing people money directly can be very, very effective. One policy alternative would be for the city to expand that pilot project to everybody in the city who qualified. A second possibility, and I'm very well aware of the number of vacant office buildings, particularly in the downtown area. So another policy alternative would be to incentivize developers to figure out how to transform those vacant office buildings into SRO hotels for people who are at the very low end.
Yeah, almost going back to the future.
Right.
Of downtown SROs. Okay, I want to make sure we have a few more folks lined up.
Really quick, Shar, I did just want to mention, just to Don's point, like what is happening in that effort. The Denver COVID Mobility Task Force did have that recommendation as part of their efforts to look at converting office buildings to affordable housing. So again, for folks that are interested in engaging, that would be with the City and County of Denver COVID Mobility Task Force. But I think we had a couple of other folks, Shar.
Yeah, Alexandra.
Yeah, hi, I'm Alexandra. I work at United for a New Economy, and we're part of a coalition called Colorado Homes for All. And so one of our big policy pushes that we're hoping to move forward in the next legislative session is to repeal the ban on rent control that currently exists at the state level. And then hopefully, if we're able to get that passed, start to partner with local municipalities to pass rent control ordinances. But kind of will depend on how things shake out in the midterms and, you know, what things are looking like going into 2023. But yeah, so that's a coalition called Colorado Homes for All, if people are interested in looking it up and finding out more information about our policy goals.
All right, thank you. Let's see.
See, Robert Greer has his hand raised.
Robert.
Oh, yeah, thanks. So I wanted to touch on the environmental aspect a little bit, because I think it's something that's a bit underappreciated. I'm pretty involved in like native plant advocacy and habitat preservation here in the Denver area. And a lot of people think that, you know, more development necessarily means more environmental impact. And it really depends on what kind of development you're talking about. If you're sprawling out into the exurbs, you know, eating up farmland, eating up virgin prairie or foothills, yeah, that has a terrible, terrible impact. But a lot of times, urban infill development, and the IPCC explicitly says this, infill development can actually avoid a lot of carbon emissions, because instead of people sprawling out into those undeveloped areas, you are just simply building you know, in areas that are already developed. And a lot of times that density can make areas more walkable because there's more amenities close by, and, you know, less dependent on cars. So that's kind of the state of the art in terms of the environmental science, as far as I understand it. And it's something that, you know, people who aren't super plugged into these issues may not appreciate at first glance. So I just wanted to get that idea out there as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Do you have other folks who would like to speak lined up? So our plan at this point, and again, it's the first time we've done this, so we're learning, but the plan is to do a follow-up via email where we compile the different suggestions and comments and have a kind of resource list of who's working on which aspects of the affordable housing issue, the degree to which we can identify those, and contact information, the degree to which we can identify those. I know that some of these are, some of what was commented on were questions like who's working on renovating a vacant office space. And I'm sure there are, because there was a bill that authorized funding for that purpose. I don't know if that's the Coalition for the Homeless or others. But yeah, we would love to connect people, especially if you're working with a coalition that is growing as compared to, you know, like a more, you know, particular self-sorted, you know, or very specialized effort. We do want to help that information exchange happen. We at CCLP, you know, we're a modest sized group. We're not the housing experts, but we do a lot of policy work. And we also believe in building coalitions and building, you know, connecting people to the groups or arena in which their priority issue is being discussed. So we're getting close to time. So any final comments by folks? And again, if you think of something afterwards, either a question or something you want to make sure is on our radar, we have a request. Can we email the chat? What we're planning on doing, Karen and others, is to kind of pull out the, you know, the information and kind of group it together. Like if you want to know about basic income, here's Don's contact information. That kind of thing. Unless, I don't know, I see another request of just send you the whole chat. But we will be doing a follow-up email to kind of get this into a more consolidated form. And thank you all for all of your contributions. I think it kind of demonstrates what a wide set of interests there is in this issue, and, you know, innovative thinking. And there's not one single thing that will completely cover all the needs we currently have today. And I can't pretend that we're going to be able to do that, but I think all of us together can make a serious dent in this growing problem. So I think that will do it. And I think I'm the one to close out, unless any of our other folks want to say anything. Oh, and do sign up. Yes, sign up for, if you're not already on our email list, sign up at cclponline.org. If you have any questions or comments, you can send them to info@cclponline.org. And we'll keep it a two-way dialogue. Thank you for joining us. I don't know, is there anybody else from our staff who needs to say anything?
I think we're good, Shar. Thank you for closing us out.
And thank you all for giving up part of your evening on a very hot day to discuss this, really one of the #1 problems that the state of Colorado and the people in it are facing. Thank you.